Hi there, Tara here with Quilts Plus Love. Today we're talking about how to quilt your quilt. I have a previous video, and I'll link it over here to the left, or maybe even up here. I have a previous video about 5 options when you quilt your quilt. So how do you choose to accomplish this particular step? It's funny, in the back of pretty much every pattern ever, after the instructions to assemble your quilt top, your patchwork pieces, it hits you with a cute line at the end like quilt and bind in your preferred method. And it's like, oh no, how do I do that? What is my preferred method? I don't know. So I'm going to tell you about the 5 ways to do it, and then I'm going to show you 2 of the ways, what I think are probably the 2 most practical for the at-home DIY quilter. Today we're going to straight line quilt on our domestic sewing machine, and you're going to want to have a walking foot for your domestic sewing machine. I'm using my small machine today, so this is pretty much exactly what your setup at home might be. We're going to use just a little practice piece, and when it comes to practicing, I cannot emphasize enough that the more you practice, the better you're going to be with anything, of course, but especially with quilting. And don't think about, the material that you're using, the batting that you're using, the thread, all of this. This is not waste. While you might be using scraps, and that's totally fine. It's a great way to repurpose them or to save them from the garbage can. Think of it as practice and as an investment in your long-term success in whatever quilt you're looking to make. If it's a t-shirt quilt or if it's a memory quilt, this is an investment in the outcome of that quilt. And just another way to think of it is like, you don't have to save this. When you're done, it doesn't have to be pretty. You can throw it away. Give yourself that permission to just throw it away. Back in kindergarten, when you were learning your ABCs and you were learning how to write them, you did not keep every practice or every sample piece because it doesn't matter. Just throw it away and keep moving. If you find that there's one that's really nice, you could keep it. In fact, I have a quilt of all of my practice sample blocks when I first bought a machine that I wanted to do free motion domestic quilting. I have a quilt that I made out of all of the blocks. It's terrible. I don't think I've ever washed it because I don't know that it would hold up in the wash. I had tension issues. I had eyelashing. I had thread problems. But I did keep some of the best parts and I made a quilt out of it. And now it's just kind of one of those funny things that I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, how much practice matters. Practice matters. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to attach our walking foot. I'm going to bring you around here. I already have my sandwich together, so I've got backing, batting, and a practice quilt top. If you want to spray baste it, you can. My practice piece today is so small that I'm not going to really worry about basting it. Pin basting is totally an option too. If you want to pin it about every 5 to 10 inches and you'll be good to go. Let me get this walking foot attached, and I want to just show you how to do this. Okay, so one of the main reasons why I always encourage you to have a walking foot whenever you do straight line quilting is because of the way that the foot will feed your fabric, feed all 3 layers through the presser or underneath the presser foot and underneath your needle. Watch as the white piece and your feed dogs, these little teeth here in the base of your machine bed, they're going to pinch together, grab, and then release. Pinch together, grab, drag it through, and then release. So I'm just going to show you how that works. So you make this stitch, they pinch, grab, and pull it through. So that's really important to make sure that you don't get any gathers or puckers, tucks, any type of wonkiness on your backing. So if they didn't feed through together at the same time, ultimately your layers would shift apart and you might have some wonkiness in your finished quilt. The other thing I want to tell you about is, so you have a walking foot and then I have a feed guide. So the feed guide here helps me make sure that my lines are parallel. When you're quilting, and you're pushing your fabric through the bottom of the presser foot, you can watch the previous thread line and make sure it's going right underneath that feed guide, and that's going to keep your lines parallel to each other. One thing I will just emphasize, and possibly a drawback to straight line quilting, if you don't sew, if you have difficulty sewing in a straight line, the guide is really important. You will notice if you get some wonkiness in your lines, you will notice that just a little bit in the end. If that's going to bother you, slow down, take your time with this, enjoy the quilting process. Okay, so now that you've got the presser foot down, you've got your thread guide on, and honestly, mine looks like it's a little, it looks like maybe it spent a little too much time in storage because it might be bowing, but I'll demonstrate with you either way. So I'm gonna hold my top thread. I'm gonna sink my needle one time to make that connection, and I'm doing this all by hand right now. Then I'm going to lift my presser foot and pull my work out from underneath my needle. I'm going to hold just a little bit of tension right here and pull up that bottom thread. Now, the reason why you want to do this, the reason why you want to pull up that bottom thread and absorb any of that extra on top is so that bottom thread, and I'm using contrasting colors here so you can see them, but that bottom thread, otherwise it'll get wrapped up in all of the stitches on the back and it'll just look like a big old mess. And you don't want that. So now we're just using our walking foot very slowly. We're going to feed our work. And I'm going to sink my needle. Sorry if my thumb was in the way there. I'm going to sink my needle, lift my presser foot, say I'm at the edge or whatever of my design, and then I'm going to swing my work around. That way I can stitch, theoretically, in the ditch, right? That's what the stitch in the ditch means. And then I'm going to, since this is really bent, guys. It really is. I think I might be having to buy a walking foot. But I'm going to run a couple stitches, travel stitch in the ditch, sink my needle again, lift my presser foot, complete the rotation. And then the beauty of the guide here is that since it's fully adjustable, you can take it out and swing it over to the other side to run it on each side of your stitch lines. So now it's going to be on this side, running exactly on this stitch line, and that'll keep your lines parallel as you sew. So when I am sewing this line, what I'm actually looking at is this. I mean, obviously I want to make sure everything with my presser foot is looking good. I'm not having any issues, but I'm going to watch as that thread line goes underneath my guide. Here again, nice and slow. You want to keep just all of the ripples and the rumples out of your fabric. As you approach that presser foot, you want everything laying nice and flat. Very slow. And then when you finish, you can either lift your work, lift that guide. I'm going to show you a little trick here. You can snip this off, and then if you've got maybe a seam tool handy, you can pull that last thread through. This isn't as critical if you're quilting for yourself, but if you are doing any type of show quilt or you plan on showing this quilt in the future, you would want to knot and sink this thread tail. So I would knot it together, use my needle, pull it all the way through, and you want to bury that thread tail in between the layers of your fabric. All right, let's take it off and see how we did. All right, I'm really glad I used contrasting thread. From the top here, you can see that I've got nice crisp corners because I pivoted and I turned. I don't know how well the light's catching that for you, but the lines do appear nice and parallel. I've got both thread tails here on top. And then when I flip my work over, here again, I used that contrasting thread. And you can see those two lines are running nice and parallel. If you had kept doing this over your entire quilt top, I think you would be very pleased with the outcome. All right, so now I'm going to use this same sample actually. I'm going to cut this video off. I'm going to show you a whole different video on how to free motion quilt. And we'll see you next time.